Hey guys, this video we're going to be checking out the Strider X2 from iFlight RC. This is a micro with 122 millimeter motor distance, and it's a Stretch X frame. You see it comes with the prop cards and some 24-35 props. But first let me just go over all the other stuff that comes in the box, then we'll get this out of the way. You get a spare set of 25-35 props. They're made by Racer, I believe. You get this dual lock on here, and I took one of the pieces off of the bottom here because I don't plan on using it. This is like the full-size dual lock, not the low profile, so it's very strong and your batteries won't come off if you use it, but I prefer less weight and I don't like using this stuff anyway. Get some battery straps. I'm not going to be using those either. You get a bunch of spare screws here, and that's for the props and for removal of the prop guards. So you get various different sizes for prop screws, and then on the bottom here you're going to need some shorter screws if you take the prop guards off, which I will be doing. And then they give you a spare set of prop guards as well. And there's a little documentation on the camera. This is, I believe, the same camera that I reviewed a while back, the Turbo Wing. It's similar to the VM275T or CM275T. It just doesn't have the PAL NTSC switching camera. I think this one is just NTSC only. And then it goes over the bands and channels and stuff in this documentation. This is pretty straightforward, not unusual in terms of setting your bands and channels. And they also included some printed documentation here that goes over the particular quad that you've got here. On the website, you can select optional different components, like you can select a different flight controller, a different ESC. The one that I got here is the standard or the basic version. It just comes with a 10 amp 4-in-1 BLE SESC, but you can upgrade to like an 18 amp 4-in-1 ESC if you want to. You could change the motors, you could change the flight controller. You can go. This one comes with an Omnibus F3. You can change it to an Omnibus F4 on the website. So there's a sort of base configuration, and then there's upgrades if you want to go through them. But my printed documentation covers all the stuff that I got. So I got the F3 flight controller with the 10 amp 4-in-1 ESC, 1106 6000 kV motors, and they also cover some of the features that are in the components that I've got here. It has a section on binding for the different receivers that are available. The one that I've got is plug and play, did not come with a receiver, but some of them do come with receivers, and then they have instructions for each of the different receivers, which is nice. And then here is the section on how to set your bands and channels. The issue with this is that you can't see any of the lights here because it's inside this little plastic 3D printed mount, and all the lights are below this board here, and there's no way to tell what channel or band you're on. So you have to kind of go through each band and each channel and kind of figure out where you're at. It took a little trial and error, but I was able to find the channel that I'd like to fly on. So just keep that in mind, that unless you take the camera out, which means you have to, I think it's glued in there with some hot glue, you won't be able to set your bands and channels unless you sort of do some trial and error. So that's one of the downsides, I think, of this setup. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, we can go over the drone itself, and let me just give you some measurements here. Okay, so it's 122 millimeters motor to motor, and then side to side looks like about 74 millimeters, and front to back looks about 96 millimeters. The main plate's about 3 millimeters, and the top plate's about 2 millimeters. And the out of the box weight comes in at about 85 millimeters. This is without the receiver or the battery. So as I mentioned before, it does come with these iPower branded 1106 6000 kV motors. Can run 2 or 3S on here. So I mentioned in the documentation that you could fly this on a 2S 850 and get about 8 minutes of flight time. It'll, obviously with this setup, this heavier setup, it's going to fly a little bit slower, more docile. So if you're a beginner, I think that might not be a bad idea. You can also fly this on 3S, and I think they suggested 550 3S, which is what I'm going to be flying, and about 7 minutes. Don't know about those flight times. We'll see how long it actually flies for, and see how efficient this is, because it is a little bit of heavier setup, and I am actually going to be removing these prop guards to save a little bit of weight because I'll be flying it outside Flying this indoors is probably just not realistic because it's just these motors are pretty big. The 1106 motors. This thing can build up speed pretty quick, and these prop guards, they don't seem to be that flexible, I guess, or not flexible, but they don't seem like they give a lot. So I have a feeling that they'll just snap if you hit something pretty hard and probably break something if you're flying this indoors. Just my opinion on that. So I'm just going to remove those. And if you do remove these prop guards, you're going to have to use the different screws. Otherwise, if you use these longer screws, they'll go right into the windings and you'll destroy your motor. So make sure you remember to switch the screws out and don't screw up your motors. That would be very bad. So the flight stack that I've got here is just a 10 amp 4-in-1 ESC Betaflight S. Nothing special there. A lot of the micros have that, and I have the Omnibus F3 flight controller with the Betaflight OSD, and that's also a very typical setup for a lot of these micros. As I mentioned before, you can switch these out for different components if you want. This should just fly just fine on this setup. I have a lot of drones micros that have this setup and they fly just fine. So the version I got is the plug and play, and you can see here they have already soldered on a little servo connector here for a receiver of your choice, and obviously I'm not going to be using a receiver that has such a big connector like this, so I'm going to probably desolder this and solder on my own FlySky receiver. I'm probably just going to put the FS8S in here, and I could probably just zip tie it to the top here behind the buzzer, something like that. There's plenty of space here, so getting a receiver in here shouldn't be an issue. So they did elect to use a JST connector on here. It does come with 18 gauge wire, which is a little bit better, but still the connector is going to limit your current draw on the battery, and so you may have flips to death possibly. I don't know what's going to happen, so we'll see what happens. I'm not going to switch it out for the initial flight, but obviously for 1106 motors here, you probably want to go with an XT30 connector. I think when I flew the Fighter 130, that had the 1106 7500 kV motors with 3-inch props, though they were two-bladed, and it had a JST, and I didn't get any flips to death. So you won't necessarily get those, but I think it reduces your chance of getting those if you switch to an XT30. So I will do that probably at some point later, but for the initial flight I'll just be using the JST they came with. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and solder on my receiver. I'm going to remove the prop guards, and then I'll hook this up to the computer, and we'll go over the settings that are in here. As I usually do, I'm just going to fly it with the stock settings from the factory. Hopefully they've tuned it and put a more recent version of Betaflight on here. We'll see. And then we'll take it for a fly and see how this flies out of the box. Okay, just a little addendum here. As I took this top plate off and was putting my receiver on here, I removed these side plates, and those aren't really necessary for the all-in-one camera. And when I did that, you can see there's a lot more space here now. With that side plates that are gone. So you could use a Rotorex 2535 prop in here with those side plates off of there. These side plates are mainly for mounting a microswift or a micro arrow, the micro CCD camera. So if you do use these side plates and the microswift, then you'll have to go back to the 2435 props. However, you could probably get like a 3D printed microswift mount similar to this all-in-one camera mount here, and just have the camera sort of tuck back further and have space for a Rotorex 2535. So it's just something I thought about. Don't necessarily have to use these side plates, but you know, if you do, then you have to go back to the 2435 props. Okay, so here are the settings that are in this model. I believe it's an Omnibus F3. Yeah, they have Betaflight 3.2. It's the September 11th release. I think that's RC5, and that's fine. I'll leave that on there. Although the official release is currently out, so they're not really that far behind. And they got UR3 as a serial RX, and I think I switched that over to iBus already. So D-Shot 600 is the default, and 8-in-2 for the gyro and PID. I'll leave all that there. I have my iBus receiver in there. It's FlySky 82. Actually, I'm going to turn air mode on, and anti-gravity. I'm going to turn that on as well. These are the battery settings. I'm going to change the minimum cell voltage to 2.8. and the warning to 3.0, just so that the buzzer isn't annoying me the instant I take off. Here are the failsafe settings. This looks like standard stock settings for Betaflight 3.2 RC5, so probably will fly just fine, but we might need to do some tweaking in the OSD. And I have my receiver already bound. You want to check to make sure your channel map is correct and that your channels are moving in the proper directions. You always want to do that, otherwise you'll have bad things happen when you try and take off. And these are the modes that are in here. That's fine, I'll leave that alone. And then I did adjust my OSD. I had a bunch of clutter on here and I just turned all that stuff off. I just have battery voltage, flight time, and throttle position. So that's pretty much the setup. Gonna fly just like it is, and we'll see how it goes. I'm just flying this on a 2S LiPo for the line of sight demo. It's a little 500 milliamp hour, not the great battery, so we'll see what the punch out's like here. Yeah, that's about what I expected. It's a heavy model. This battery is not so great. You still do flips fine. Yeah, no problem on the flips. And the props are pretty quiet. You know, they're clones of, or I guess blown up clones of the Gemfan 2035s. Those are pretty quiet props, but these aren't as durable. All right. Still pretty fun flying that line of sight. It's not the fastest. I don't usually fly that fast line of sight anyway. Yeah, it still sounds very smooth in the air, no oscillations, no vibrations. I think the tune's probably okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll fly at FPV now.